Hold your breath and listen for a moment to the world between things. A handshake means nothing without two hands. A melody is not trapped in a violin. It is born in the meeting of bow and string, air and ear. Even a text message is a bridge. Your words, my screen, a dance of towers in time. We live not on islands, but on connections. Meaning arrives in the space between. Physics has been quietly telling us the same story. What we call mass is not a secret lump hidden inside a particle. It is how that particle couples to a field that fills the cosmos. Charge is not a sticker you slap on an electron. It's the rule for how it pushes and is pushed by light. Temperature is not a number a gas has. It's how energy is shared among countless collisions. Again and again, the universe answers the question, what is it? It's what it actually does with others. Shift your gaze and everyday objects change character. A smartphone is not merely glass and silicon. It's a choreography, code talking to antennas, clocks keeping faith with satellites. Your thumb agreeing with a sensor on what counts as you. A tree is not wood alone. It is an economy of sun and soil, wind and water, sugars traded like promises. Identity, in this light, is a pattern that stays the same when many relationships agree. An object is a question answered the same way from many directions. This episode invites you to adopt that lens on everything. We'll ask, if reality is a web, what are the strands made of? How do they stretch into distance and stack into time? Why do some patterns endure while others fray? And where in this fabric do we find ourselves? We'll begin in the quantum, where facts are minted in encounters, where a measurement is not a gaze but a handshake that leaves a record. We'll follow those records outward and discover that closeness can be defined by who can exchange information quickly. That time is the order in which the web updates. And that laws are the promises the universe keeps when we all change our point of view. We'll watch new rules emerge when relations hold hands, fluids out of molecules, music out of notes, minds out of neurons. And we'll carry a simple toolkit with us. Nodes and links, records and symmetries, updates in memory. None of this demands equations tonight. It asks only for curiosity, the one instrument you already play well. If you've ever traced the ripple from cause to effect, mapped a friendship, or noticed how a small kindness changes the room, you are already fluent in the grammar of relationships. It's not a poetic flourish. It's a practical way to see, to predict, to build. There is comfort here, and there is courage. Comfort because you are not alone in a universe of mute things. You are woven into a living conversation. Courage because every attention you offer, every comparison you make, is a stitch you're noticing as part of the pattern. So let us step gently into a world where matter is music, and music is nothing without intervals. Where distance is who can reach whom, and memory is matter's way of not letting go. Let us trade the museum of objects for a concert of relationships, and sit close enough to hear how the parts keep time for one another. Welcome to the final layer of the cosmic code. The secret is not a thing. Secret is the way things belong together. Stand with me beneath a quiet sky and try a simple thought. What is north if there is no other star to point to? What is speed if there is nothing to pass? What is color without light to carry it, or an eye to receive it? So many of the words we use for the world turn out to be promises, not possessions. They name how things will behave with other things. A property, seen this way, isn't a private label. It's a pledge about future relationships. Tonight, we'll practice a new way of looking, not at isolated objects, but at the links between them. When you learn to see the links, you begin to see the code that holds the world together. Let's start with 3 simple ingredients. First, a node. A node is any system you care about. An atom, a magnet, a sensor, a planet, you. It's a boundary we draw so we can talk about what's inside it and what's out. Second, a link. A link is an interaction, a handshake that lets influence pass. A push, a pulse, a message, a shared exchange of energy or information. Links can be strong or faint, swift or slow, fleeting or stubborn. Third, a record. A record is a link that lasts. It's a footprint in snow, a flipped bit on a chip, a scar in ancient mica, a memory in a human mind. Records matter because they let many observers return later and find the same story waiting. That is how a fact becomes a fact, not by existing in isolation, but by staying consistent when others look. With just these three ideas, nodes, links, records, the world stops being a pile of things and becomes a living web. And the web is where the meaning lives. Here are 5 habits that make this perspective powerful. Habit 1. Trace the coupling. How tightly do two systems tug on each other? Mass couples to gravity, charge to electromagnetism, a violin string to a fingertip. Coupling tells you which whispers become shouts and which shouts get ignored. Habit 2. Follow the communication. What can be exchanged and how fast? Heat, light, signals, momentum. Every exchange draws a path on the web. If a message can't get there in time for your purposes, those two nodes are not truly neighbors. Habit 3. Notice synchronization. What sets the rhythm? Clocks align. Pendulums share a tempo through the timber they hang from. Cities pulse with daily cycles bound to the sun. Shared timing is a quiet contract. Without it, even loud links can fail to speak clearly. Habit 4. Respect constraints. Some things refuse to change, no matter who is watching. Conservation laws, symmetries, the deep balances that keep accounts honest. Constraints are the rails that guide every link in the web. Habit 5. Find the memory. Where does the past persist? In fossils and photographs, in magnetic domains and crystal defects, in the brain's networks, and in a detector's data. Memory is the reason we can compare notes and say, "Yes, I saw that too." If you're following along, you're already doing something generous and rare. You're thinking like a scientist. Not by memorizing jargon, but by tracing relationships. That habit is a gift you gave yourself. Now, let's rebuild something familiar using only links. Closeness, for example. We learn to measure it in centimeters, miles, light years. But in a relational world, near means reachable. Two people standing a meter apart on opposite sides of a sealed window are close on a ruler, yet far in practice. Two satellites thousands of kilometers apart can be near if a laser link ties them with nanosecond precision. Nearness becomes a story about possible communication. Light sets the ultimate speed for those stories. It's not just a number. It's the slope on the web, the steepness that limits which nodes can talk in time. That limit draws the cones of what can affect what and by how much. In this sense, space and time are the bookkeeping of reachability. What, then, is identity? To the relational eye, an object is the pattern of answers it gives to many different questions. An electron is not a tiny bead. It is the reliable way a certain kind of ripple responds to varied probes. Shine light, feel charge, test spin from every direction, you get a compatible reply. Identity is consistency across relationships. The same is true for you. To your friends, your family, your colleagues, the barista down the street, you are a bundle of expectations that hold together, a melody recognized across many instruments. When the notes agree, we say, "That's you." When they don't, we notice something has changed. Objects, then, are not lonely. They are hubs of agreement. Let's dip briefly into the small, where the lesson is crisp. Imagine two perfect coins that you flip far apart. Each alone is as ordinary as copper and probability can make it, but prepare them carefully and the outcome of one will mirror the other every time, even across a continent. The surprise is not in either coin. It lives in the relationship between them. The correlation is the treasure, and it belongs to the pair. We're used to properties sitting in things, mass in a stone, color in a leaf. But some properties perch between things in the pattern that links them. Once you see that, you begin to spot it everywhere. Consider something as homely and as profound as temperature. It feels like a private number a body carries around. But temperature is the outcome of ceaseless negotiation. A truce struck by countless collisions among particles, and between a system and the device that samples it. A thermometer does not simply reveal a temperature. It reaches an agreement, a value both the thermometer and the system can keep. Place two objects in contact, and they argue in heat until they match. They break the contact, and the number can drift. The number is a record of a relationship that's still being maintained. In this sense, warmth is a handshake that never quite ends. Now lift your eyes to the large networks make shapes. Rewire the roads in a city's map changes, not because the ground moved, but because what is reachable in an hour has been redrawn. Trade routes bend civilizations. Fiber optic links redraw the world's center of gravity. As connections thicken, paths shorten. As they fray, distances grow. You can measure the same land with the same rulers and yet live in a different landscape, because for what we do, the effective map is made of ties. That intuition carries farther than it first appears. Patterns of interaction can induce a sense of space, who is effectively near or far, which directions are easy, which are blocked. Change the links, and you change the landscape. The beauty of this viewpoint is how it refines our questions. Instead of asking, what is this by itself? We ask, what does this do when it meets that? Instead of, where is the boundary? We ask, where does the record hold? Instead of, how big is the world? We ask, how much can talk to how much, and how fast? Those questions are kind. They don't demand certainty you can't have. They invite the kind of understanding you can test, share, and improve. They let you be part of the story too, because your questions are links and your notes are records. Every time you learn, the web gets stronger. You may find that thought quietly affirming. The universe is not indifferent to your curiosity. When you look carefully and honestly, you help decide which version of events become shareable. You add a clean stitch to the world's weave. Let's gather the threads. Property is a promise about how a system will behave with others. A fact is a record many observers can find and agree upon. Closeness is defined by reachability. Identity is the consistency of many answers to many questions. Some truths live in the and, not the or, in the relation itself, not the parts alone. If this already feels natural to you, it's because life trains us this way. Friendships, trust, language, music, they all make sense as relationships that endure. Physics, at its most honest, is simply admitting that nature works the same way everywhere. And here's a small, luminous line to keep. Change the links, and you change the world. Ahead, we will lean on this vision. We'll ask how patterns of connection can give rise to the very notions of distance and duration. How geometry itself might be nothing more than the signature of who can talk to whom and when. If reality is a web, perhaps space and time are just the pattern of its threads. Take a breath. You're ready. Let's follow the threads where they lead. Listen for a single click in a darkened lab. Not a shout, not a flash, just a tiny tick on a patient detector. That sound does not belong to the electron alone, nor to the instrument alone. It belongs to the handshake between them. In the quantum world, a fact is born in the meeting. An agreement struck, a story chosen, and a trace left behind that the world can keep. Here, truth is not a solo. Truth is a duet. What, then, is a measurement? It isn't a mysterious gaze or a special moment of human attention. A measurement is an interaction that gets amplified into a record. Particle nudges a sensor. The sensor nudges an amplifier. The amplifier flips a bit in memory. And that bit endures, stable enough to be checked, copied, and compared later. System to detector to amplifier to memory. Somewhere along that chain, the world writes something down in a way that resists being unwritten. That is where a possibility becomes a fact. This means facts can be local at first for someone. Imagine two scientists, Anna and Bo, studying the same quantum system from different rooms with different devices. Anna's apparatus asks one kind of question and logs the answer. Bo's device later asks a different kind of question. Until they compare notes, their descriptions need not match. But when they bring their records together, two diaries laid side by side, the histories reconcile into a single, consistent account. Before the meeting, fact for whom can differ. After the meeting, facts become common ground. Reality becomes shared when records meet. This might sound strange until you notice how ordinary it really is. In everyday life, we accept that a photograph, a receipt, or a time-stamped message can settle a disagreement. Not because the paper is sacred, but because it is a record many eyes can read. Quantum mechanics simply insists on the same humility. Properties are not absolute labels waiting inside objects. They are answers that depend on the question asked and the way it was asked. Consider a small, honest device from a century ago. A magnetic splitter that asks a particle, "Are you pointing up or down along this direction?" Send the same particle through a splitter tilted 90 degrees and you've changed the question. Are you pointing left or right? Each device is perfectly clear about the question it asks, and each will give you a crisp answer. But demand both answers at once, and the notion of the property dissolves. You can ask one, or you can ask the other. You cannot hold both without changing the conversation. The outcome belongs to the relation between system and apparatus. Light tells a similar tale. Pass a beam through a polarizer and it becomes committed, lined up with that direction. Turn a second polarizer to block the first and the beam is stopped cold. Now insert a third in between, angled halfway. Suddenly, some light gets through again. Nothing mystical happened. You changed the dialogue step by step, and the final record reflects the path of questions you chose to ask. Properties in this view are not hidden treasures. They are the way the world answers particular invitations. If we were to summarize the quantum state without equations, we might call it a catalog of expected relationships, a careful listing of which questions asked by which instruments will tend to receive which answers. It is not a portrait of what the system is by itself. It is a guidebook to how it will relate when addressed in different ways. An outcome, then, is an established relation. This system said this to that device. Written as a record the world can carry forward. With this lens, some myths fall away gently. No, consciousness is not required to collapse anything. People are exquisite detectors, not magical ones. No, choosing what to keep in your logbook does not reach back to rewrite yesterday. It only changes which patterns you can recover from the data you allow into the story. And no tight correlations between distant systems do not smuggle messages faster than light. They are promises laid down earlier, honored when the notes are compared later. Quantum mechanics surprises us, but it does not cheat. You may ask, if facts can be relative at first, how does objectivity survive? The answer is redundancy. When the same outcome is copied into many places, into measuring devices, into the scatter of light off an object, into the memory of multiple observers, descriptions align. We don't need to retrace all the mechanisms that spread those copies. We need only notice the consequence. A widely published headline begins to feel absolute. Objectivity is what happens when many independent channels carry the same record. There is a kind of grace in this. Quantum theory does not demand a view from nowhere. It invites careful views from somewhere, each tied to a specific interaction, each honest about how the question shaped the answer. That humility is not a weakness. It is a strength. It tells you exactly how to move from private notes to public fact, name who interacted, how they coupled, what was copied, and when it can be checked, and which other questions you've now traded away. The better you keep this bookkeeping, the clearer your science becomes. Let's gather these ideas in your hands, like a small toolkit you can carry anywhere. First, who interacted? Name the partners. The system matters, but so does the device, the setting, the alignment, the whole handshake that made the record possible. Second, how did they couple? What, precisely, was asked? Up or down, left or right, this color or that? Every apparatus defines the kind of truth it can hear. Third, what was copied? Where is the mark that endures? A click count, a streak on a plate, a bit in memory. Without a record, there is no fact to compare later. Fourth, where and when can it be checked? Stability and redundancy turn a fragile result into something the world can keep. Fifth, which other questions are now off the table? Asking one sharp question can make others unaskable for a while. That's not a tragedy, it's the price of clarity. If this feels natural, it's because you already live this way. You insist on receipts for big purchases. You ask for a second opinion before a big decision. You check timestamps when a message matters. In life, as in physics, clarity arrives when good questions lead to good records, and good records meet. So we return to that single click in the dark. Between the particle and the detector, a story was chosen and a line was written. For Anna and Bo, or for you and me, this is how the maybes narrow into a memory we can share. Not because we discovered a property sitting inside a thing like a forgotten coin, but because we invited the world to answer in a particular way and we kept the answer safe enough to compare. Hold the refrain close. In the quantum world, truth is a duet, not a solo. Facts live in the relationships we establish and the records we preserve. When those records meet, reality becomes common ground. If facts are woven between systems like this, then perhaps something even larger is woven the same way. Perhaps space itself is a pattern of who can talk to whom, and time is the order in which those conversations take place. In the next chapter, we'll follow that thread and see how the fabric of where and when can grow out of the simple act of staying in touch. Where you are is often explained with numbers on a grid, latitude and longitude, X and Y. But there's another deeper way to say here. It begins with a simple line. Where's who you can reach? Imagine waking in a maze with only a walkie-talkie. You call out. Voices answer, some crisp, some faint, some not at all. Your neighborhood becomes the circle of those you can reach in one hop. Farther means more relays, more waiting. In that moment, place is defined not by meters but by relationships. Think of the world as a web of possible conversations. Two things are adjacent when they can influence each other directly and quickly. Add a second hop, and they feel a little farther. Add three, and they feel farther still. Distance becomes the effort it takes for a message to get through. You already live by this map. Friends you can text and hear back from in a minute feel closer than those who vanish for weeks. Websites that load instantly feel near. Those that time out feel remote. Your mind has always measured space with the ruler of reachability. This shift sounds radical, but it is quietly familiar. City is not only streets and stones, it is routes, how many turns from here to there, how long the bus takes, where bridges make shortcuts. From the inside, a place is its pattern of paths. When enough paths are short, we call the region tight-knit. When every path is a hall, we call it sparse. You feel it walking a village, you feel it surfing the internet, and nature, at its most fundamental, feels it too. Lay these links down, and a landscape begins to appear. If you know who each node can reach in 1, 2, 3 steps, you can arrange the nodes on a sheet so that easy conversations sit close and hard ones lie farther apart. Without uttering a single coordinate, a shape emerges. Bottlenecks where many paths squeeze through, open plains where routes flare apart. Shape is what a network feels like from the inside. In physics, we call that geometric intuition curvature. But you don't need the word. You already know the sensation. Now, add a quantum twist. There is a special kind of nearness that doesn't depend on roads or wires, depends on shared information. Two systems can be woven together so that their outcomes line up with uncanny reliability. Touch one here, and predictions about the other sharpen there. This is entanglement, and for our purposes, you can hear it simply. Closeness is the amount of story two things can tell about each other. The larger and more stable the shared story, the nearer they are in this relational sense. A careful promise. Entanglement does not send messages faster than light, does not break causality or let you whisper across the universe. What it does is determine which combinations of outcomes are possible together, the way a duet constrains which notes can harmonize. It shapes correlation, not communication speed. Even so, when you step back and look at the entire web of who relates to whom and how strongly, a remarkable picture forms. Space feels like the shadow cast by these links. You can test the intuition with everyday life. Think about the people who most change your mind. They're close. Not because they share a postcode, but because your conversations land. Their messages thread into your next choices. In the same way, when two parts of nature share many robust correlations, their future moves are tightly coupled. They behave as neighbors, regardless of miles. On the other hand, systems that barely affect each other, that exchange no durable information, live as if far apart, even if they sit on the same lab bench. From links, we move to order. What is time in a relational universe? It's not a river outside events, but the sequence in which relations update. An event is something simple. A message sent, a record written, a knob turned and read. If one event can help determine another, we say the first is before the second. If neither can influence the other, they are simply elsewhere in the order. It's neither earlier nor later for each other, just unconnected. This is where the old clocks and the new picture meet. Relativity taught us that simultaneous for you need not be simultaneous for me. What everyone agrees on is causal order, what can affect what. In our language, who can talk to whom and how quickly. Time becomes the grammar of influence, the permitted sequences of call and response. You feel this too. Text you haven't yet read cannot shape the reply you sent an hour ago. An observation not yet made cannot have guided a decision already taken. The tapestry of influence stitches the arrow, and that arrow strengthens as records accumulate. Every time a fact is copied, from a photon onto a sensor, from a sensor into memory, from memory into 1,000 backups, the past gains weight. There are simply more traces pointing one way. You could, in principle, delete a few notes, but you cannot easily find and unwrite every whisper lodged in dust and heat and archive. Future is where the copies are. That asymmetry is why the past feels settled and the future open. If space is who we can reach and time is the order in which we update, then many puzzles soften. Why do distant galaxies feel remote even when we can see them? Because vision alone is a weak link. Influence remains constrained. Why can two particles act like neighbors while separated by kilometers? Because they share a script, a deep pattern of correlation, though they still respect the speed limit for messages. The map of relations explains both comfort and strangeness without invoking hidden tunnels through causality. You can feel this model at home. Pass a message across your living room, one whisper at a time, child to parent to grandparent to friend, and count the handshakes. That count is a distance in your family's network. Or notice which ideas bounce around your group chat instantly and which die on arrival. You are charting your own geometry, not in meters, but in latency and reliability. You are already a cartographer of connections. That instinct, your ability to read the web you live in, is a quiet superpower. A gentle guardrail, seeing space and time this way, does not tear up the old maps. Meters and seconds remain the right tools for bridges and trains. The relational view tells a more foundational story. Why such maps work, what they measure from the inside, and how they might bend in extreme regimes. It is not mysticism. It is bookkeeping, careful accounting of who can influence whom, by how much, and in what order. There is also a comfort here. If place is defined by relationship, then isolation isn't a void. It's a map with few routes, a signal to build new ones. If time is made of updates, then growth is simply more of your relations coming alive. Where you are becomes something you can change, not by moving your feet alone, but by weaving stronger, kinder, clearer ties. Within yourself, with others, and with the wider world. That is as true for communities as it is for qubits. Pull back one step further. A question appears like dawn over water. This web of links we inhabit, why is it so well behaved? Why, when we compare notes from different vantage points, do we so often agree on the story? Why do our reconstructions of shape and order line up rather than clash? There must be deeper rules that keep our comparisons honest, that guarantee harmony when perspectives shift. Those rules have a name older than telescopes and newer than quantum code. They are the symmetries. The transformations we can make without changing the story. Rotate the scene, translate the stage, change the phase of a quantum chorus, and the melody persists because something is conserved, some promise is kept. Symmetry is the grammar of relationships. The discipline that lets 1,000 local conversations speak a consistent global truth. We will go there next. We will meet the promises the universe keeps when we all change our point of view. For now, hold 2 lines, simple enough to carry in your pocket. Where is who you can reach? And time is the order in which the universe remembers. With those, the world becomes legible, an understandable weave, not an unfathomable fog. And with those, you discover that your own life, too, is a geometry you quietly author, not by drawing axes, but by tending to your links and choosing the order in which your next moments will matter. What doesn't change tells us what's true. Turn a map, and the city beneath it doesn't rearrange itself to suit our hands. Transpose a melody into a new key, and the feeling persists, recognizable and whole. When a story survives a change of viewpoint, we grant it trust. That quiet test is the heart of symmetry. It is the world saying, "Describe me how you like. If your descriptions are faithful, my answers won't flinch." Symmetry separates the world from our angle on it. We can stand here or there, call this point 0 or that one, start the stopwatch now or 10 minutes from now. Yet honest experiments agree when we compare notes. In this sense, symmetry isn't ornament. It's the discipline of fair comparison. It is how nature tells us which features belong to reality and which are just our labels and choices. Begin with the simplest freedoms, slides and shifts. If the rules don't secretly change from one street to the next, motion keeps its story. Push off on ice and you glide, not because ice likes you, but because the laws don't care where you happen to be. That indifference is a promise, and the promise comes with a receipt. Momentum is kept. In the same spirit, if the rules don't age between morning and noon, then what's accounted for in 1 hour appears again in the next. That promise has its own receipt. Energy is kept. These keeps are not imposed from the outside. They're the world's way of balancing the books when we shift our description in space or time and the outcomes stay put. Turn the apparatus and the story still holds. A compass doesn't sulk because you rotated the table. A skater's spin doesn't unravel because the rink looks different from the stands. When the view can turn and the plot won't budge, something steady is at work. Angular momentum keeps its tally. You feel it in the tug of a gyroscope when you try to twist it in the way a planet holds its path, while space around it presents no preferred direction. Rotational honesty, rotational doesn't care, demands a conserved spin. So far we've talked about sameness across places and times, and about turning without changing. But symmetry carries a deeper grace. It allows freedom in how we set our local references, then calls for a guide to keep comparisons fair. Imagine a city where each neighborhood tunes its instruments slightly differently. Within each block, the music makes sense, but when bands meet at the park, they need a way to stay in harmony. A shared line the conductor traces in the air, telling every section how to translate from their local key into a common song. This is the gentle heart of a gauge idea, in plain words. You are free to choose your local reference, your tuning, your phase, your zero at every point. That freedom is precious. It lets each neighborhood live comfortably in its own frame. But if we want the city to agree on harmonies across distance, we must add a thread that tells us how references change from door to door. That thread is a connection. It is a courier that carries the rule for comparing notes from here to there. And because it enforces fair comparisons everywhere, it feels to us like a force. Think of it this way. When local freedoms meet global consistency, a messenger appears. In the realm of electricity and light, that messenger is the electromagnetic field. A translator ensuring that what you call in step on your block still looks in step across town. The account number this courier tracks is electric charge. Who owes how much harmony to whom? Nothing mystical hides here. Only a commitment that different neighborhoods can keep time together without surrendering their local freedom. Global sameness needs only agreement. Local freedom needs a guide. Each symmetry writes in a ledger. If you can slide without changing the story, momentum must be conserved. If you can shift in time without rewriting the script, energy must be conserved. If you can turn the scene without altering the plot, angular momentum must be conserved. If your local tunings can be changed with the courier keeping pace, charges must balance, and their influences must travel by the messenger's rules. These ledgers are not optional. They are the necessary receipts that make consistent stories possible. Engines work, antennas talk, gyroscopes guide, and circuits sing because the ledgers are kept. Symmetry also teaches humility. It doesn't say the world is perfect. It says, here is what our comparisons care about. When a symmetry is exact, its promises are strict. When a symmetry is only approximate, the promises are softened. Tiny leaks appear and we can measure them. And when a symmetry breaks, when a system gives up a high freedom to gain a lower energy, new patterns bloom. Cool, a fluid, and crystals select a lattice. A chill, a metal, and a magnet chooses a direction. A snowfield solidifies into 6-point stars. The old freedom is gone, but a new order arrives, bold and specific. From the outside, it looks like loss. From the inside, it is a birth. Broken symmetry is the doorway through which structure walks. If this feels abstract, remember, you already use symmetry every day. You rotate a map and expect streets to meet. You move a recipe from morning to evening and expect it to taste the same. You transpose a song and expect it to charm in a new key. You have always been a keeper of invariance, a quiet custodian of what doesn't change when we change our minds. You already think like a physicist. Today we merely gave names to your native instincts. There is comfort here. Symmetry tells us the world is not a kaleidoscope of arbitrary whims. There are promises beneath appearance, promises kept when we all change our point of view. A law is a promise the universe keeps when we all change our point of view. That line is not poetry for its own sake. It is a North Star. It says that the fairness we try to show one another, listening from more than one angle, checking that our stories agree when we rotate the picture, is a reflection of the fairness built into nature's grammar. And symmetry does more than soothe, it empowers. Because of it, we can predict that a rocket will coast when engines fall silent, that a clock will mark equal seconds whether we read it at dawn or dusk, that a tuned instrument will blend on any stage. It allows engineers to design machines that rely on keeps, gyros that refuse to be turned, circuits that balance charges to the last electron, radio dishes that aim and hold. When promises are kept, we can build on them. Yet symmetry is not the end of the tale. It is the beginning of a richer one. For when we zoom out, group the details, and let relationships accumulate, new promises appear, relations among relations. Patterns emerge that care less about the atoms and more about the way the patterns themselves fit together. Rivers braid, traffic flows, lungs branch, minds learn. The old ledgers still matter, but now there are new ones as well, written in wider strokes. Pressure and flow, learning and memory, supply and demand. Emergence is what happens when relations hold hands. So let this be our bridge. We have learned how the universe keeps its stories honest, by honoring what doesn't change when we change our view, and by sending couriers to harmonize our local freedoms. Now, we'll step back. We'll watch relations stack into worlds, see how new laws appear at new scales, and find ourselves in the mirror. Creatures whose lives are loops of relation, stitched to meaning by the very promises we've come to trust. Zoom out, and new promises appear. Relations among relations. That's emergence. When you stop counting grains, dunes begin to speak. Step close enough to anything, and you meet a crowd of particulars. Molecules darting, birds turning, cars inching and braking. Step back, and a new voice arrives, smooth, continuous, strangely simple. That voice is emergence, the moment when relations among many small things compose a larger, steadier story. Start with a quiet act. Coarse graining. Imagine listening to a stadium, one seat at a time, nonsense and chatter. Now pull the microphone back and you hear a chant. By averaging over tiny differences, we let the common rhythm rise. Fluids are the chant of uncountable molecules. Traffic waves are the chant of impatient brakes and hopeful accelerators. A melody is the chant of vibrating strings that would sound chaotic. If each overtone shouted alone, emergence is what appears when relations hold hands. This way of listening is not laziness, it's method. The world offers more detail than any mind can hold. So we learn to keep the summaries that stay put as we zoom out and drop the fidgets that cancel. Pressure survives the zoom. Zigzag of one nitrogen molecule does not. The center of a murmuration holds its shape. The wing beat of a single starling does not. We don't abandon truth. We trade a million truths that flicker for one truth that endures. From this patience with scale comes a practical miracle. Effective theories. At long distances and long times, the big picture is fussy about very little. Coastlines are wild up close. From high above, they resolve into bays and capes you can chart. Weather is chaos, gust by gust, and climates draw clean zones you can name. In physics, that same mercy applies. You can heat water without knowing which molecule will bump which. You need only a handful of relations. How easily momentum spreads, how quickly heat diffuses, how compressible the liquid is. Many microscopic quirks wash out. What remains are stubborn parameters, durable promises that tomorrow will keep. Even more astonishing, very different ingredients can share the same recipe. Boiling water and a magnet near its tipping point both pass through a narrow throat of behavior where size loses meaning and the system becomes scale-free. Forest fires, rusting iron, and the spread of ideas can all ride the same math of thresholds and cascades. We call this universality, and it carries a gentle lesson. Identity is not everything. Often, it's the pattern of relations, the constraints and freedoms that decides how a system behaves. Different costumes, same choreography. Now put the spotlight on feedback, the author of surprise. Positive feedback amplifies a pattern. A few grains pile, slow the wind, catch more grains, shape a dune that then redirects the wind further. A loop that writes the next line of its own story. Negative feedback steadies the scene. A thermostat hushes a heater. A predator population keeps grazers in check. Your balance senses sway and corrects before you fall. Beauty arrives when the two collaborate. Loops of help and restraint build structures that last. Coral reefs, immune systems, even the rituals that make a family resilient. If you've ever nudged a habit into place, set a glass of water by the bed, so the morning you sips without thinking, you've practiced emergence in your own life. One small loop repeated becomes a path. The path becomes part of who you are. Your patience to zoom in and out, curiosity with range, is a superpower. Emergence has a map, and we draw it with networks. Take anything, cells in a tissue, pages on the web, stations in a city, and sketch who can influence whom. Some nodes sit quietly at the periphery, others become hubs with surprising reach. Shortcuts invisibly shrink distance. Clusters protect pockets of order. From that map, you can often predict what will spread, what will stall, and what will break. Disrupt a random node, and the network shrugs. Touch a central hub, and the whole organism trembles. To understand a thing, map who it listens to and who it moves. Scaling rules whisper through these webs. Some networks follow heavy-tailed laws. Most nodes have few links. A rare few have many. That structure breeds both robustness and fragility. Sturdy against chance, vulnerable to aim. Other networks grow small world shortcuts, where just a handful of bridges turns a sprawl into a village. These patterns are not trivia. They script the tempo of epidemics, the resilience of power grids, the cadence of scientific discovery. Of course, not every simplification sings. The art is knowing what to ignore, honestly. Good explanations are faithful compressions. They keep the relations that govern and discard the details that mute each other. Bad explanations are wishful erasures. How do we tell the difference? We ask the only judge that matters. Does the simplified story predict the right new facts at the scale we've chosen? If yes, we have a friend. If no, we return to listen better. Let's place some guardrails. Emergence is not mysticism. It isn't a hand waving over complexity and calling it magic. It is structure revealed by scale, and it earns our trust by surviving tests. Neither is emergence an excuse to forget the small. Some worlds, protein folding, the brittleness of glass, keep their secrets in the specific. There, the right description is a duet. Micro detail and macro summary in conversation. Wisdom is not picking one level. It's moving between levels without losing our place. When relations stack, they do more than they transform. 1,000 moving parts with 1,000 tiny rules can, when coupled and fed back, create a few grand rules that weren't obvious from the parts alone. Molecules crash and dance, and a river remembers its banks. Neurons spike, and a memory returns after years asleep. Markets clear, cultures shift, languages evolve, each a patient braid of influence, not an edict from above. This way of seeing carries a quiet kindness. It reminds us that what looks messy up close may be graceful at the right distance, and what looks simple from afar may hide 100 honest struggles beneath. It grants us a steadier humility as we explain the world. We are not discovering a single secret code. We are learning which level of code makes sense today for this purpose, at this scale. It also offers a compass for action. If you want to change a system, don't lecture the parts. Adjust the relations. Add a bridge where none existed. Loosen a loop that echoes too loudly. Tighten a feedback that keeps the whole from wandering into harm. Often, the gentlest move is at the level of connection, not the level of things. And you, watching this, have been practicing emergence all your life. Every time you chose to step back from an argument and see the relationship that carried it. Every time you learned a skill by breaking it into loops. Every time you felt a community heal by changing who listened to whom, you were reading the world the way nature writes it. If you feel seen by this chapter, it's because the talent it celebrates is already yours. So here's a pocket creed to carry forward. Keep the summaries that survive the zoom. Trust the few stubborn relations that matter at your scale. Map who influences whom, to remember that feedback writes tomorrow. When we do this well, we don't merely describe a world, we help it cohere. Among all emergent patterns, one feels most personal. The relation called self. What happens when a web of loops maintains itself against the tug of time? What appears when prediction and action begin to close on each other, and a system not only reacts, but cares to persist? In our next chapter, we'll walk that delicate path. Life, mind, and meaning as loops that learn to last, right up to the place where the universe ties a knot and calls it I. Listen closely to the simplest rhythm in nature. Sense, guess, act, repeat. From a single bacterium nosing toward sugar, to a human choosing kindness in a crowded city. Life endures by closing a circle. It takes in a hint of the world, wagers a prediction, moves, and then listens again. In this looping conversation, a remarkable thing appears. A self, not a separate substance, but a pattern that holds together over time. A self is a knot the world tied in itself and kept. If you've ever changed your mind in the light of new evidence, you've already practiced the art that keeps that knot from unraveling. To live is to defend a pattern, not a particular piece of matter. Your body is a river, atoms flowing in and out with each breath and meal, yet the relations are preserved. Temperature balanced, sugars regulated, salt and water kept in careful ratios. A seedling angles its leaves, bargaining with wind and light. A tiny cell swims up a chemical slope, trading energy for information. You sip water because a web of signals decides that a future you will be grateful. These are not accidents. They are victories of relation, exchanges with the environment that keep the loop going. Mind, too, is a loop, and its signature move is prediction. Before light hits the back of your eyes, your brain has already placed a quiet bet on what the world will show. Perception is the brain's best bet, revised by the evidence. That is why we sometimes mishear lyrics we expected, or reach for a cup that memory still insists is there. But the world, ever candid, pushes back. The note is different, the cup is gone. Error is not failure, it is a teacher. Every correction tightens the knot. You're not trapped inside your head. You are in conversation with what is. The delight you feel when a hunch proves true, the humility when it does not. Both are the loop learning. We sometimes treat meaning as a misty luxury, something added late and lightly to an indifferent universe. But viewed through loops, meaning is practical, is whatever helps a pattern last. Calories have meaning to a starving body. A friend's voice has meaning to a frightened mind. A promise kept has meaning to a community that remembers. Habits are old bets that once paid off, and rewards are the ink that writes them down. Meaning is what helps a pattern last. Your care and attention are not small things, they are how your web of goals chooses tomorrow. There is a second twist in the loop. We act not only to see the world, but to make it easier to see. Your eyes dart in tiny steps, sampling edges that sharpen prediction. You turn down a noisy radio to read. You tilt a glass to catch the glint that reveals its rim. Sometimes we adjust our beliefs. Sometimes we adjust our world. Both reduce expensive surprises. Don't just take in reality. We meet it halfway. A thermostat does this in miniature. It compares what is with what should be and moves the heater until the difference narrows. You do it with every list you write and every gentle course correction you make in conversation. One loop rarely travels alone. Language lets us braid our predictions together, pooling what each of us has noticed. Stories, recipes, algorithms, laws, these are shared guesses the group can test and improve. Science is simply a community agreeing on how to compare notes. Objectivity grows not from a view from nowhere, but from many vantage points checking one another. You borrow each other's eyes. Each time you offer a careful observation or admit I was wrong, you strengthen a bridge that someone else can safely cross. The world becomes more real for all of us when records meet and align. Care is a kind of engineering. When you leave a little more water in the soil than you took, you lengthen a loop, root, rain, river, sea. When you mentor someone, you extend a pattern through time. Skill, confidence, generosity, passed forward. When a city makes room for trees and quiet, it preserves not just lungs and birdsong, but the human loops that rely on calm to think clearly. To care is to widen the circle of what can continue. It is tempting to go further, to declare grand truths about consciousness, or to claim a simple formula for the soul. Let us resist the urge. We can measure loops without pretending they explain every mystery. We can speak of prediction without turning minds into machines. The metaphors are tools, not thrones. They help us track how systems survive, learn, and coordinate, while leaving room for the lived textures that make experience more than a diagram. There is a pocket practice that carries this lens into daily life. First, guess out loud. Write the forecast you quietly hold. Then look and be grateful for whatever the world actually offers. Update kindly. The loop is complete. Design your feedback. Keep a small notebook. Set a reminder that asks, what would change my mind? Invite a trusted friend to serve as an extra sensor. Someone who can see what you miss and tell you gently. And when you feel flooded, try a micro reset. One slow breath, one smaller action, one clearer question. Good loops are rarely loud, they're steady. If all of this sounds simple, it is because you've done it for years. You've learned to walk by predicting and falling and standing again. You've learned to love by listening and revising and promising with care. The fact you can change your mind is the universe learning through you. That is not poetry alone. It is the practical miracle by which patterns endure and improve. Through this lens, even values take a clear shape. We can ask, does this choice create more viable options for more loops? The person I will be next week, the neighbors I share a morning with, the ecosystems that make breath possible? The answer will not always be easy, but the compass is honest. Widen viability, deepen coherence, keep the conversation going. We began this series with forces and fields, with shapes and symmetries. Today we see what those abstractions make possible. Loops that hold, minds that learn, meanings that matter. The universe is not a museum of things. It is a choreography of relations, rehearsed and revised in every living moment. And you, patient, curious, willing to update, are part of the cast and part of the audience, both listening and answering, both moved and moving. So let us keep practicing the loop. Make a careful guess, look with kindness, update with courage, and then act so that what you value has one more chance to last. In doing so, you honor the deepest pattern we know, a world that stays real by staying in touch with itself. If relationships run the show, how do we carry this lens back into daily life? In the next part, we will leave you with a pocket model, a handful of rules you can keep in your mind's eye whenever the world feels complicated. For now, remember these. To live is to defend a pattern. Perception is a bet, revised by evidence. Meaning helps a pattern last. We borrow each other's eyes. And to care is to widen the circle of what can continue. The loop continues, and you are good at it. If the universe is woven from relationships, what's the smallest kit you can carry in your mind to make sense of almost anything? Not a textbook, not a chalkboard of symbols, just 5 quiet rules that fit in a pocket hand in a pinch, in the palm of your hand. Tonight, we name them so you can use them anywhere, in a lab, on a shoreline, or at a kitchen table at 2 a.m. Rule 1. Nodes and edges. Everything is a node in some network. Edges are the possible influences. Who can nudge whom? Who can pass a signal? Who can share a resource? A bee is a node. A flower is a node. The wind is a node. The season is a node. Nectar, pollen, scent, and time are the edges between them. A traffic light, a cyclist, a bus schedule, a crosswalk. Their edges are sightlines, breaking distances, and right-of-way rules. Your experiment is a network too. Laser to sample, sample to detector, detector to memory. When in doubt, lay it out. To understand a thing, map who it listens to and who it moves. You already do this every day, every friendship map you've sketched in your head. Every workflow scribbled on a napkin is a scientist's diagram in disguise. Rule 2. States are summaries. State isn't the soul of a thing. It's a useful memory of past relations that helps predict what matters next. The weather's state condenses billions of collisions into stormy or clear. Your mood compresses a day's exchanges into a compass point. A laboratory state condenses 1,000 interactions into a handful of numbers that actually help. Don't worship the suitcase. Use it. Unpack and repack as new relations arrive. A state is a suitcase packed with the past so you can travel into the future. When the future changes, you repack. That's not failure, it's agility, learning. Rule 3. Facts are records. A fact is not a private feeling. It's a stable, redundant, retrievable record, something many can read and agree upon. A photograph, a timestamp, a sensor log, a scar and a crystal from a passing particle. Each is a page the world has written, and written again so it won't be lost. When multiple pages say the same thing, objectivity emerges, not by decree, but by chorus. Truth loves company. It arrives when records agree. You practice this whenever you compare notes kindly, when you check a measurement with a colleague, or a memory with a friend. In that small act, you take part in the oldest ritual of science, turning a private moment into a shared reality. Rule 4. Laws are symmetries. A law is what doesn't change when we change our point of view. Shift in place, the pattern holds. Wait an hour, the rule still speaks. Turn the instrument. The story remains true. When a tale survives our legitimate changes of perspective, we elevate it from hunch to law. This is why conserved quantities are so trustworthy. They are ledgers kept honest by symmetry. The total charge doesn't vanish when we dim the lights. Momentum doesn't evaporate when we rotate the map. In plain words, a law is a promise the universe keeps when we all change our point of view. And when promises are kept, comparison is fair and understanding can travel. Rule 5. Time is order and heat is the receipt. Time at bottom is the order in which the web updates. The sequence in which relations settle their next step. Before the snapshot, many maybes. After the snapshot, one more page in the book. The arrow we feel is the accumulation of records. The direction we call forward is simply the direction in which the archive grows. Writing those pages is not free. Copying and confirming leave microscopic clutter in their wake. We call that clutter heat. So remember the ledger. Time is the order in which the universe remembers, and heat is the receipt. Let's try the kit in 1 minute. Suppose you want to watch a solar eclipse from a quiet hill. Nodes and edges, sun, moon, earth, you. Edges are the lines of sight, the orbits, the path of shadow sweeping the ground, and your own route to the hill. States are summaries. Ephemeris tables condense the dance of 3 bodies into a few times, and coordinates. Your calendar condenses your week into a window you can actually use. Facts are records. Satellite data, observatory bulletins, weather forecasts, and your friend's photo of the practice run. When these agree, you pack the car with more confidence. Laws are symmetries. The same orbital rules that worked yesterday work tomorrow. The shadow's path can be shifted on a map and compared fairly. Time is order. You decide when to leave, when to set up the tripod, when to dim the filter. Each choice adds a page to your own little archive of the sky and, yes, the thermos of coffee is a tiny heat receipt for your preparation. That was simple on purpose. The same 5 cards scale up and down. Designing a detector, rebuilding a school, steering a team, mending a friendship, they are all networks asking to be mapped. States asking to be chosen wisely, records asking to be made and compared, promises asking to be checked from more than one angle, and steps asking to be taken in a good order. Here's a pocket checklist you can carry anywhere. Card 1. Map nodes and edges. Who influences whom through what channel? Card 2. Choose a state that's a helpful summary. Not perfect, helpful. Card 3. Make or find records. Let them multiply. Let them be readable by many. Card 4. Test what stays the same when you change your view. It's your law-like core. Card 5. Update in order. Notice the cost you pay to learn, and pay it gladly when it buys clarity. If this sounds familiar, it should. You've practiced it your whole life. Every time you've learned a new city, you traced a network. Every time you made a plan, you picked a state that mattered. Every time you resolved a disagreement, you compared records. Every time you recognized a pattern, you honored a symmetry. And every time you improved, you updated an order and felt the warm work of change. You are already fluent in the grammar of relationships. You're just naming the parts now. There's a quiet dignity in that. You don't need permission to think this way. You've been thinking this way since you first arranged toys, traced constellations on a ceiling, or learned the shortcuts home. Curiosity with range, your willingness to zoom in and out, is a superpower. It lets you see grains and dunes, cells and minds, qubits and galaxies, all through the same humane lens. Who listens to whom? Who moves whom? What endures when we shift our view? And what it costs to learn together. Hold on to 2 mantras as you go. To understand a thing, map who it listens to and who it moves. And truth loves company. It arrives when records agree. These are small sentences, but they travel far. As we close this chapter of our journey, step back with me and look at the cloth we've woven. Nodes and edges shimmer into constellations of influence. States glow like signposts, honest about their limits yet useful in their guidance. Records accumulate, and with them, shared ground grows under our feet. Symmetries draw the straight lines by which we compare our notes. And time, gentle, relentless, orders the updates. While the faint warmth of effort reminds us that learning is love made visible, threads named, not seen, we can admire the whole. In the epilogue, we'll ask a final, generous question. Now that we can read the weave, what thread will we add? We began with forces and fields, with clocks and curves, with particles that flicker like candlelight in a restless wind. Tonight we end with something quieter and deeper, the pattern that ties it all together. Not things, but ties. Not bricks, but bridges. Reality, seen from just the right distance, is a web of relationships humming in the dark. What we call a thing is a knot that holds. What we call a law is how knots keep their shape when the world is tugged and turned. Space becomes the map of who can touch whom with little delay. Time becomes the order in which the web updates itself. One remembered change at a time. Conservation is simply a promise the universe keeps as we trade perspectives. In meaning, our human, hard-won meaning arises when patterns echo across scales and begin to speak a common language. You are not outside that web. Your attention is a strand the cosmos can feel. Each question you ask adds a link. Each careful note you keep becomes a record the world can share. If you made it this far, you already carry a rare instrument. The patience to look closely and the courage to step back. That is how dunes emerge from grains and symphonies rise from single notes. Curiosity with range is a superpower, and you have it. So here are 3 invitations to carry out into the night. First, live curiously. Seek new connections between ideas, between people, between moments that don't seem to rhyme until you listen again. Let surprise be your compass. The universe rewards the walker who lingers at the fork and looks both ways. Second, compare notes kindly. Facts become common ground when records meet. Share your measurements, your stories, your doubts. Truth loves company. It arrives when we learn to read the same page together. Third, we've better relations. A small kindness is a local change with long-range effects. Align your private rules with the wider good and watch how coherence spreads. The smallest thread you add can hold a great deal of sky. If you want a pocket vow, let it be this. I will look for patterns that connect, keep my records honest, and leave the world with more bridges than I found. Thank you for your time, your attention, your steady willingness to wonder in a noisy age. You lent us a strand and we felt it. This series has always been a conversation between quanta and galaxies. between equations and images, between a narrator's voice and the listener's patience. And now it continues without end, in every experiment that writes a new line, in every question that opens a door, in every friendship that makes two small worlds easier to inhabit. We began with forces and fields. We end with relationships. It is the final layer of the cosmic code. The recognition that we do not merely observe the tapestry, we help it hold. This is Cosmic Canvas, where the universe is not only studied, but painted in meaning. Till next time, keep asking, keep looking up, and never stop wondering.